Hello, I'm Mark Schaldhouse, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty easily, today is Wednesday, November 27th, 2024. On Friday, August 30th, 2024, we visited the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. Fredericksburg, Texas is a town of about 12,000 people. Really nice town. We spent one night there. Really enjoyed it. Nice, friendly, stereotypical Texas town. We really enjoyed it. It's Admiral Nimitz's, Admiral Chester Nimitz's hometown. Being a Navy guy, I know a fair amount about Admiral Nimitz. Really respect him. He's one of my personal heroes. And when I found out that there was a museum in his hometown, it was added to our list. It's about an hour northwest of San Antonio, Texas, so it's a little bit off the beaten path, but not bad. Outstanding, positively outstanding museum. Phenomenal, and it covers a lot of the war in the Pacific. My dad fought across the Aleutian Islands during the Battle of Midway with the U.S. Army. My father-in-law fought through the Western Pacific, Southwestern Pacific, Australia, Philippines, New Guinea, places like that. So this museum had some really personal ties. And as I said, Admiral Nimitz is one of my personal heroes. I've read several books on him. Incredible individual. And as I addressed in the video, this is World War II, and at that time we didn't have a Joint Chiefs of Staff issue like we have today. The United States Navy went to the Commander-in-Chief on a direct line. The Army and the Army Air Corps went to the Commander-in-Chief on a straight line. They didn't go to a single party, so you had two people in command, a divided command, and it's addressed in the museum. It was a tough situation because if you know anything about MacArthur, I'm not impressed by MacArthur at all. How he did it, why he did it, whatever. Anyways, the museum is absolutely fantastic. Let's get on with the video, because to me this museum was probably one of the most personal museums that I've ever visited, and shortly after this one we would do the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and which was another personal one, because after my dad fought in the Battle of Midway across the Aleutian Islands when the Japanese occupied them, he joined the 101st Airborne and then jumped into Normandy on D-Day and made every combat jump after that with the 101st. And we made it to Bastogne. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one. As I said, this one here, extremely emotional for me. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one.
I'm going to start this video off with one of the presentations that was, I'm going to say, buried inside the museum, only because of its location. It wasn't that the information was buried. It was about the five Sullivan brothers from Iowa who joined, all five of them joined the U.S. Navy shortly after World War II broke out, with the goal to serve together as an unbeatable team. They were assigned to the USS Juno, a cruiser, and that cruiser was involved in combat action. And one mother in Iowa, one family in Iowa, lost 5 sons in a single action. The sinking of the USS Juno, the cruiser USS Juno. In Alaska, while we were on our Alaska cruise, we found a memorial to the individuals that were lost on the Juno. And that's on our Alaska videos. And this information was in the museum, and because of their loss, we now have a ship named after the Sullivans. this caused a change in U.S. military policies of where brothers could serve. Fredericksburg, Texas, the hometown of Admiral Chester Nimitz, one of my very few personal naval heroes. Super guy, read several books on him, always did the right thing, so to speak, and incredible. The town is about 12,000 people. It is about an hour northwest of San Antonio, Texas. Very nice town. We really enjoyed it. And when the museum, if you read the exhibits, the history of the museum, the town of Fredericksburg, the city of Fredericksburg, wanted to make an Admiral Nimitz museum, and he said, no, make it for my men, make it for the men who fought the war in the Pacific. And he was the commander of U.S. naval forces in the Pacific during World War II. He took over just after Pearl Harbor and maintained that position until the end of the war. And at that time, if you don't understand how the militaries were structured, the Navy and the Army were not under a joint secretary. The Navy was one branch of service going to the Commander-in-Chief, and the Army and the Army Air Corps were another branch of service going to the Commander-in-Chief. It was not a joint chairman, joint chiefs as we have it today. The USS Nimitz, Navy aircraft carrier number 68, is a nuclear-powered carrier. I was assigned to the air wing that was flying on her, so I have numerous traps on her. 1988 to 1990 with my E-2 squadron, and then later on with VRC 50 out of the Philippines and VRC 30 out of here in San Diego. I probably have traps on her again. She was an absolutely beautiful ship and honors the individual that she was named after. One of the many interesting things I found at the museum was the plaza of the presidents. 10 consecutive presidents from 1941 to 1992 served in the armed services of the United States of America. That tradition has obviously been broken. There is free parking all over town for the museum. We saw no parking meters anywhere in town. There may be, and I saw no paid parking lots. So free parking. There is an admission fee to the museum, and you need your ticket to get into, well, the admission building is one building, then you go around the corner for another building on the same city block, and then you walk about 2 blocks away to the Pacific Combat Zone, I think is the title of it, which you'll see later on, which is where the PT boat is. And it is a paid admission museum. It is well worth it, and you need your ticket to get into the other buildings. The signage at the museum is really, really good, and I'm trying to give you the signage before the before the display, and there is a wide variety of items, not just naval as you've seen, but things directly associated to the war in the Pacific, fighting across the islands, fighting across China, Burma, India, the outer islands of Japan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Fantastic museum. Social media, I think, said plan 2 to 3 hours. We were there probably 4.5 to 5, and I would say probably plan on 5 to 6 hours. You can re-enter the museum as many times as you want, so plan on getting there early, breaking for lunch to recover, and then come back. It is a lot of walking. The presentation of the museum in history is interesting because it goes back to prior to World War I, and what was happening in the Far East, which at that time most Americans didn't even know it existed. I didn't even know it existed because I wasn't born until after World War II. But the turmoil in the Far East started many, many years ago, and the museum documented how that rolled up into World War I, rolled up into World War II, and how it was fought. And along with that, it also explains how Admiral Nimitz grew up, as you saw, and the elements that were significant in his life. It was interesting that he applied to West Point, the U.S. Army Academy, and was turned down, and then got into Annapolis. So we almost didn't get him, so to speak. And I'm speaking as a Navy guy. As documented in the signage, Japan in the 1920s, 1930s, kind of has a internal disruption, whatever you would like to call it, of its military and emperor, and the decision is made that they are not only going to control the Far East, Asia as we know it, but all four corners of the world. And to do that, they're going to have to conquer a number of other countries because they are the superior race. One of the many artifacts in this museum is one of the Japanese mini-subs that was used for the attack on Pearl Harbor. And if you know history, the USS Ward fired on one, actually shot, put a hole through the conning tower of one of the submarines, and that one was lost. In the museum, not only do you get to see the exterior inside, a really nice movie video that plays during this, but on the outside of the museum, or in another area of the museum, I think it's in another area of the museum, you get to see the inside. They've cut the other side of this sub away, and you can see the inside of this sub. Normally when I visit a museum, aviation museum, railroad museum, car museum, I try to put the photos in a logical order, say for a aviation museum, by manufacturer, by make, model, by time frame, something like that. With this museum, I just kind of left everything in the order. I did change the order of some of them to put them a little bit better together, but I kind of left most of these in the order I shot them, so they're not quite as well organized as normal. However, I tried to give you the signage associated with the display so you could stop and read them if you want. This is a fantastic museum for history, and if you don't know history, as they say, you're doomed to repeat it. I got my Associate of Applied Science and Bachelor of Science at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, and a town about 12 miles due west of us is Murfreesboro, and it shows up on this civil defense armband. So we saw that and we were giggling and laughing. We had, and we did, visit Carbondale and Murfreesboro on our return trip on this 38-day vacation. We visited the National Museum of the Pacific War on the way outbound, and we went through Carbondale and Murfreesboro on the way inbound. With my career in the Navy as a naval aviator, a number of things sparked my interest, and I wanted to learn about Nimitz. And someone had exposed me to him, whatever, and so I read a biography on him while I was still in college. It was a two-volume biography, and then when I got on the Midway, found more information about him. And because I was stationed in Japan on 2 different tours for 5.5 years, flying off the USS Midway, going down to the Philippines and a number of other things, and now being in the Western Pacific, that theater, World War II theater of operations, I read a fair amount about MacArthur and how MacArthur ran World War II. And this is where we come up to the divided command issue, because MacArthur was in the Army command, and the Commander-in-Chief, President of the United States, directs the Army, and then the Commander-in-Chief directs the Navy. So we had two different parallel, and no one settling the differences between them issues. But you learn a lot about MacArthur, and one of the books that needs to be read about MacArthur, one of the books that needs to be read, just momentary pause, is The General versus the President by H.W. Brands. And another one is The Coldest Winter, which is about the Korean War. Two very interesting books about MacArthur. One of the many things I liked about the museum, besides I like Disneyland, I love what Walt Disney and Roy Disney did for the world. When they come up to artillery, ordnance pieces, weapons, they identify what they are, they give you details on them, and it's really cool. I was impressed by the amount of weaponry that was on display at the museum, and the quality that it was in. With the Sullivans, you saw a presentation about Gold Star families. Gold Star families are families who have lost someone in service to the United States, in military service. The Blue Star families, and my mother did this while I was in service. You get a flag like shown in that one frame. It's got a blue star on it. You hang it in your window, and that indicates that you have one individual in U.S. military service at the time. Gold Star, you've lost someone. If you have two people in service at the same time, you get a flag with two blue stars, or three. For the Sullivans, it was 5. I really liked how the museum had the operations very well detailed, mapped out, showed examples of how the operations went, and then we found the retaking of Attu, Shimea, Dutch Harbor, the Aleutian Islands, which was part of the Battle of Midway. The Japanese were after Midway and the Aleutian Islands at the same time. One battle force went towards Midway, the other battle force went up and took occupation of the portions of the Aleutian Islands. And my dad was in the Army at this time, stationed in Alaska and the Aleutians, and he fought across the Aleutian Islands during the Battle of Midway. So this was one of the more emotional museums we'd been at, and one of the more emotional presentations inside the museums. The Sullivan Museum set me back. This set me back. Just you know the people, or you know of the people, or the type of people that make these sacrifices. And we just slipped past it. There was a presentation about naval installations in Texas, and I have been in Chase Field, Naval Air Station Chase, Beeville, Texas. I got my wings at Navy Corpus. I was stationed at Navy Kingsville as a jet instructor, and I used to fly into Navy Dallas on cross countries because it was always a nice stop. There was quite a bit on China, Burma, India, the American Volunteer Group, which were the Flying Tigers, General Stilwell, Flying the Hump, and I didn't know that they had B-29s out there that weren't carrying bombs. They were carrying cargo, and not a whole lot of C-47s went up there. A lot of that was done on the Curtiss C-46, C-46, and the Commando, because the Commando had more powerful engines and was pressurized. The C-47 had less powerful engines and wasn't pressurized, and this was high altitude, cold weather flying. During World War II, to bomb the United States, Japan made balloons out of paper. And as I understand it, their school children actually did it. And they were hooked up to incendiary bombs, and then they were put into what we would later call the jet stream and be taken into the northwest United States. Caused a couple of casualties, not a whole lot. It wasn't real successful, but it did start a few forest fires, and it did take a couple of casualties. And in that one exhibit, you saw a parachute from a Japanese anti-personnel bomb that was dropped on Saipan. Because my dad and his twin brother and I think one of his other brothers actually fought in the Pacific Theater, I did a number of research projects, I guess you call them, reading what were classified or titled as really good books on World War II, and kind of laughed about things like the thought police in Japan. So the mainland Japan is being bombed by the B-29s, and the U.S. forces as they close in on it, and the country is still being controlled as to what they can say or what they are allowed to indicate they are thinking about, which was kind of fun. Also, we went past the Tokyo Rose thing. Tokyo Rose wasn't just one person. Tokyo Rose was a number of people, and one person in particular that they talked about was actually a U.S. citizen that was in Japan visiting family when Pearl Harbor occurred, and she was kept there, and one of the agreements she had was she couldn't say anything derogatory about the U.S., and she would later be convicted, and then it would be set aside. My father-in-law, Hilly Hansen, was a first-class machinist mate in the Navy in the Western Pacific, Australia, the Philippines, a number of other island stations as the war progressed from Australia up to the home islands of Japan. And so this museum hit home in several ways, and I'm going to tell you the honest truth, because I normally go to a museum, say we're looking at trains, airplanes, cars, whatever, and when we get out of there, as we're driving someplace, our conversation is talking about the really neat and interesting things we've seen there, the unique, unusual, we've never seen them before, or how they were presented. When we left this museum, both of us were quiet. We had about a hour and a half drive to our motel in the San Antonio area, and both of us were quiet. Just our parents played a role in this, and we saw what they had to go through and what they did, and the people they were with. As we move into what is actually the third part of the museum, the first two parts are the prime building area. You walk out of the one building into this Japanese Garden of Peace, and then you see some of these outdoor artillery pieces and the torpedo tubes, and then you walk into the second building, show your ticket again, and learn how to tour that building, because we got lost in it. We got confused. You have to know how to tour that building. It's set up sequentially, and there's indicators that we didn't know were there, and that makes it interesting. However, while we were in the Garden of Peace, one of the other visitors made some comment about was it appropriate to have a Garden of Peace in the National War of the National Museum of the Pacific War, and the answer is why not? Learn from history, and yesterday is gone. We can learn from it, but we can't change it. Yesterday is gone. We lived in Japan for 5.5 years, never felt any hostility from the locals, and had some interesting interactions with a few drunk World War II veterans along the way. I thought it was appropriate to have the Garden of Peace there. The third portion of the museum, and I hope I've got my slide numbers correct. I don't think I've changed them that seriously, was the Pacific Combat Zone, and that's where they had a couple of the aircraft, or one of the aircraft, and that's also where they had the PT boat presentation. And with the PT boat presentation, there was a lot of information, and I didn't realize this, but they addressed it in the museum. The PT boats also operated up in the Aleutians. They operated in the northern and southern Mediterranean sections as well. I mean, the only thing you ever hear of PT boats operating is in the Western Pacific, and it turns out they were in all the theaters of operation. Well, the aircraft carrier played a major role in World War II. The contributions by the battleships, which were ending their reign, can't be forgotten. And I really liked the 16-inch gun presentation that was there. And I've got photos of the USS New Jersey alongside the USS Midway when we were in the Indian Ocean. We've recommissioned 2 battleships, as I remember, and put them back underway, and then decommissioned them again. But when we recommissioned them, they put all new armament on them, or a lot of new armament on them. It's impressive to see a battleship steaming alongside your aircraft carrier. When the USS Midway was commissioned just after World War II, or in the closing days of World War II, it never saw combat. And then to be steaming alongside the USS New Jersey, and a peer by age, a peer by design ship, is impressive. And I'm making an assumption here that I'm going to address, and that is like things like the Army has a tradition of naming helicopters after Native American Indian tribes or notable Native Americans, the Kiowa, the Iroquois, the Choctaw, things like that. The U.S. Navy has a tradition of naming aircraft, of naming battleships after states, naming cruisers after capitals of states, and naming aircraft carriers after historic people related to the Navy, or to historic battles related to American history. So the Saratoga is named after, in honor of the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, I believe. And notable ships, how they got their names. The USS Midway had her keel laid as another ship name, and then after the Battle of Midway, the workers at the dock and a number of other people voiced their opinion to have the USS Midway's old name changed over to the Midway in honor of the Battle of Midway. In the PT boat exhibit in the Pacific Combat Zone building area, they covered a lot about how this particular PT boat was restored. It was really cool. There were several docents on hand, or a couple of docents on hand, that were talking about it, and you could ask questions and take a look at it. They didn't let you walk on it, but you could look at it. It was very nicely displayed, really well maintained. The entire building, well, the entire museum was fantastically displayed. I'm tongue-tied here. This museum was one of the most emotional museums we'd been in a long time, and one of the follow-on museums was the National Museum of World War II in New Orleans. So we had 2 really high-pressure emotional museums. The USS Lexington Museum in Corpus Christi, which I've qualified prop and jet aircraft on, was also a fairly emotional museum. Part of the Pacific Combat Zone presentation is this area outdoors, and unfortunately the photos don't do it justice, but it pretty darn accurately shows part of it's over. When you look at it and you say, well, it's overgrown with brush, this is called camouflage. This is called concealment, and the photos don't do it justice. This shows what the defensive positions can be, and when you're in an engagement, defense normally has the advantage because they've been there, they're established, they're anchored. Offense has to move, offense has to roll over. And this presentation of the Japanese defensive positions was enlightening. If you're a history fan of the World War II era and how we got there, Japan had started its hostilities in the early 20th century, the early 1900s, and prepared itself for a jungle war. After World War I, we didn't prepare ourselves for anything, and so a lot of what we had to come up with was what we realized we might need as we watched the world change in the 1930s, 1940, 1941. Remember, we got Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. So we were into our second year of the 1940s when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. And as a result, you'll see a lot of what we used as our military materiel for World War II was actually an extremely new development, as in didn't exist prior to, say, 1930. I don't know if I've said this. I took more than 650 pictures at the National Museum of the Pacific War while we were there. I think I have 300 plus in this presentation. I've screened out quite a few. I tried to keep it interesting. This was one of the most emotional museums I'd been in for a number of reasons. My dad and my father-in-law both fought in the Pacific Theater. My mother was a Navy wave during World War II, primarily in Washington, D.C., a few other places as well. And then my dad did the 101st Airborne through Europe. So Admiral Nimitz, one of my personal heroes, this was an extremely emotional museum. And when we left, we were just quiet. We just drove to our next hotel in San Antonio, and we're just quiet for quite a bit. This is a fantastic museum. Highly recommend stopping by. Yeah, it's not exactly on the main route, Fredericksburg, Texas, but really nice town, good accommodations. I think we stayed at the Best Western. A Navy veteran and a Stoof air crewman was there. This was fantastic. Thanks for watching. Thanks for bearing up with this one, and hope to see you in another one.